All right, hello everybody. Today we start part one of two parts. A look at Hinduism, which I guess we might call kind of our first major world religion that falls under a kind of a single banner or a term for our time together here. Although, as we'll quickly see, one of the things about Hinduism that it can be frustrating for students who are new to it, even students who have spent some time with it, is that the kinds of things that fall under the banner of Hinduism are so diffuse and scattered and all over the map that it's difficult to kind of talk about Hinduism as any kind of concrete category of things. That is to say, it's very difficult to finish a sentence starting with "all Hindus believe blank." It is such a blanket term that scholars of religion will often recognize that when you talk about Hinduism, you're really talking about thousands of kind of different mini religions in one, even if they share kind of a bedrock of culture, of language, of terms, and worldview. So we'll do our best to kind of, in a short space of time, to try to nail down what I take to be kind of the major elements of Hinduism. But always keep that in mind. Like all of these religions are vastly complex, but there's something particularly to the Western eye and the Western mind that's particularly baffling, I think, about Hinduism, but we will do our best along the way. All right, so where do we begin? So if we compare it to the other kind of major religious systems, religions that we associate with the quote-unquote East, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, the term Hinduism usually refers to the collection of various other Indian religious traditions. So that's kind of another way of saying what I was just trying to explain, is that Hinduism is a kind of a blanket umbrella term for lots of very different and in many ways contradictory kinds of things. And if you remember when we were looking at indigenous religions, and particularly the Australian Aborigines and those things like Dreamtime, same thing here. It's very difficult to apply concrete Western categories and definitions. We like our Aristotelian logic. If A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. These kinds of things are often slip past those kinds of concrete categories, and it's one of the things that makes it difficult, I think, for a Western mind to really wrap itself around. So just kind of, we'll look at examples along the way of this, but just kind of one small example. You may have heard this word dharma. It's a Hindi word, ancient Indic word, that's often translated into English as religion. But that word dharma, if you really start to unpack it, it's this really complex web of meanings. It can refer to your own personal life philosophy. It can refer to your duty to your family and to the gods of the household. It can have to do with the nuts and bolts of particular rituals that you do at particular times of the year in particular places. And so to simply just say, oh, dharma in Hindi, oh, that just means religion in English, is to lose a whole kind of host of echoes and meanings embedded in that word. There's always loss when you translate from one language to another, but when you're dealing with these kind of complex mystical ideas and terms, it's even there's even more loss that goes on. So yes, again, one of the fascinating things and also kind of maddening things about Hinduism is if you look at how do Hindus practice Hinduism. It's all over the map. You can be a Hindu and adhere to kind of extreme asceticism. That is, you remove yourself from society. You go into the woods. You go up into the mountain to live, a simple, isolated life as a way of kind of touching the divine. And on the other hand, there are traditions in Hinduism that say pursuing extreme sensuality, sex, for example, as a way to kind of mimic the creative powers of the deities, is a way to practice Hinduism. There are strict, very regimented temple rituals and public festivals, as well as kind of intimate, private rituals in Hinduism. There's no, there's no pope of Hinduism. There's no kind of single figure around which a huge swath of the adherents of the religion kind of look to as kind of a shepherd. It's really fragmented, and there's this famous detail, this famous fact, quote unquote, that there are 330 million deities in India. There are 330 million Hindu gods. And again, there too, the number, I think, like, to the Western kind of mathematic mind, you think, okay, we can list them. It's a long list, but we can list them from 1 to 330 million. That's not the point. I think that the point of that stat that you'll often see pop up is the idea is that the divine in Hinduism has an infinite number of faces. It's kind of the idea is that you can't pin down the face of God because there are infinite faces of God, and therefore there are kind of infinite ways of approaching the divine under this banner that we call Hinduism. So let's begin at the beginning. One of the reasons our textbook doesn't start with, but puts Hinduism early, is that it does seem to be one of the world religions, living religions today, that goes back the furthest in terms of human civilization. So kind of Hindu tradition says that the first sacred songs sung about the gods and some of the faces of the divine were started to be sung and passed down from mouth to ear around 8,000 to 6,000 BCE. So we're talking about 10 to 8,000 years ago. Now, it's always, whenever you're talking about tradition, it's difficult to kind of pin these things down specifically, historically speaking. But kind of the historical evidence, textual evidence, does show that these songs and traditions start to become more formal. They start to be written down. The language, the alphabet caught up to the songs, you might say, and they start to be formalized around 2500 to 1500 BCE. So that's more like 4 to 5,000 years ago. Which again, in terms of human civilization, this is still deeply, deeply ancient. This is the slide I had in the background, now foregrounded here. So here you just get a few of those 330 million faces here. And again, one of the things that's so confusing, I think, again, particularly to the Western eye, is that the Hindu gods have, it's the art forms and depictions are kind of wild and fantastic. You have different colored faces. You have part animal, part human gods. You have these multiple arms and hands, and they're all carrying something different. And the colorful pinks and blues and oranges and the gold and the jewelry. What does it all mean? Again, very difficult to say. In part 2 of this series on Hinduism, which we'll get to next week, I'll pick a couple of examples and try to break down what are some of the common interpretations of some of these symbols and what do these mean, because it looks so odd to the Western eye. So when you talk about the origins of Indic civilization, you're talking about kind of this area of the world, which is called the Indus Valley, this fertile plain which straddles the Indus River here in the northwestern part of what we would call the subcontinent of India today, and kind of bridging over into what we call Pakistan today. Again, a place of a political kind of ethnic hotbed to this very day. But archaeologists have shown that some of the very first kind of human civilization and organization took place in this area, as we see it more so than in most places anywhere else in the world. And so it's out of that very early ancient civilization and organization that these first songs, so goes the theory, about these gods start to arise and then start to spread throughout this area. So India today, what we call the country of India, the subcontinent, is still the heart and soul of Hinduism. The vast majority of Indians, Indians from India, subscribe to some kind of form of Hinduism. You find Hindus throughout the world. There's lots of Hindus. In America, there's Hindu temple right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. But India is the heart and soul of Hinduism. So I want to talk about a few of the major texts that are important to kind of understanding Hindu ideas and notions of deity. Again, just because Hinduism is such a broad term, there's no kind of one, quote-unquote Bible of Hinduism. There are several texts that are considered sacred by many, if not most, Hinduisms. But it's a different relationship between worshiper and text than you would see, say, with a Jew and Torah, or a Christian with the New Testament and the like. The Vedas, these religious text songs, are often accepted as being kind of the first of these the oldest of these songs, and amongst the first to be written down in the ancient language and alphabet of Sanskrit. Here you see a parchment with some lines of the Vedas written down in that particular ancient alphabet. Now, where do these come from? Again, whenever you're going this back far in history, it's always very difficult to be concrete with your terms and with your dates. But the idea is, you can see this in lots of cultures. Most cultures that develop a written language, their core literature, their traditions, circulated orally. And so, the language itself, the spoken language, existed before the alphabet, before you could, find a way to express the language in written form. It probably, these songs circulated orally for hundreds of years before finally becoming compiled somewhere around 2000, 1500 BC in Sanskrit. So the alphabet catches up to the language. And again, still, in terms of human civilization and in terms of writing, this is extremely early. And what's really fascinating is that even in these oldest artifacts, you see stuff that is still part and parcel of Hindu belief today. So you can draw in some ways kind of a straight line from this era, 3,000, 4,000, maybe even deeper than that, to the present day. So you see things like yoga meditation, the importance of being out in nature and in particular parts of nature, the people tree or the Bodhi tree, as a place that's potent for meditation. Representations of deities, goddesses. The god Shiva, who's one of the major Hindu deities, shows up extremely early. Seems to be there at the beginning. So here's a quite a wonderful example of a people tree, a very ancient tree here. You can see how it grows up with its wild branches, and then these kind of these vines or extensions of branches kind of connect to the ground. And it's Hindu tradition that to sit beneath the people tree is to kind of connect you to the heavens in some kind of way. And you can even see how the very look of the tree seems to suggest that it connects heaven and earth in this very literally rooted kind of way. We'll see that kind of idea bleeds over into other Eastern religions as well. You see it in Jainism. You see it with traditions about the Buddha meditating under the people tree or the Bodhi tree. Here is a very early free sculpture of Shiva. Shiva is sometimes called the destroyer. And here he has a demon of chaos impaled upon his spear. And I get to the Western eye, Shiva with his spear, stabbing these figures. He looks like he's I don't know. It'd be very easy to see this. Oh, he looks like a demon himself. He's a dangerous, kind of murderous demon. But in the Eastern tradition, Shiva's the destroyer. He plays a crucial role in the whole creation story. There is creation needs to be in some ways preserved, but also to start over and to run through another cycle. Parts of it needs to be destroyed. So Shiva plays a role in the whole kind of cycle of the universe. We'll get to more detail on that in a moment. So according to Orthodox Hindus, in as much as there are Orthodox Hindus, the Vedas are texts that they refer to again in Hindi as Shruti texts. That they were kind of divinely transmitted to ancient sages, rishis as they're called, kind of conduit holy men who are in touch with the divine in a way that they can pass them on to the greater populace. And so the tradition goes is that these sacred texts were revealed mystically to these rishis and then passed down orally for generations until they were finally written down by this quasi-historical, quasi-mythic figure called Vyasa. And here's a depiction of Vyasa in a typical kind of Hindu art way. You see the bright colors. He holds up his hand in blessing and greeting, and he holds up a box of pens. He's the scribe, and you can see a jar down here for mixing the ink. He's kind of again, if you're familiar with the Greek mythology, we talked about Hesiod or Homer, these kinds of poetic figures that bridge that gap between the purely oral world into the world of writing. You might say Vyasa plays that kind of role. Was there a Vyasa? Probably not. He represents kind of just a shift in culture, is how I would define him. One of the oldest of these Vedas, the so-called Rig Veda, kind of gives us perhaps a view into an early Hindu idea of who the core deities were in their pantheon. And again, it overlaps with lots of polytheistic systems, which associated gods with elemental forces, with parts of nature. So you have Indra, who's a thunder god. He's kind of a Zeus, Thor figure. Agni, a god of fire. That's a very common association in polytheistic systems. Soma, god of the sacred drink. Ushas, a goddess of the dawn, again associated with the sun. So these kind of core kind of elemental nature deities. We saw that with the Greeks, right? You could say broadly that the Hinduism expresses some of these same ideas. Other Shruti or revealed texts are the Upanishads. And it's in the Upanishads that we start to see developed some of these kind of core Hindu worldview ideas, which I would say are things that the vast majority of Hindus would kind of ascribe to, even if they might pursue them in different kinds of ways. Just like the Vedas, these were teachings that were kind of mystically filtered through these highly realized, divine, almost near divine figures, these masters, mystical insights from rishis who began to pursue these insights through meditation. So meditation and chanting and mantras become very important in Hindu belief as a way of kind of getting getting outside your rational self and tapping into something deliberately irrational, something beyond human understanding. And that's where the Upanishads come in. So in the Upanishads, we get this concept of the Brahman, which is not it's confusing. There is a god Brahma, but that's distinct from the Brahman. So Brahman is you might say is kind of the ultimate reality. This is kind of ultimate divinity. You don't paint Brahman. You don't give Brahman a human face, masculine or feminine. It is kind of the unknowable, unseen, all-pervasive ultimate reality. And it is the goal of all Hindus to ultimately release their soul, their spirit, so that it merges with the Brahman. It becomes part of that all-pervasive spiritual reality, what you might call a Hindu heaven. Reincarnation. This is something that many Westerners, even if you haven't studied Hinduism, are familiar with. This idea that one is when you die, your soul is reborn. So these rishis taught that the soul, which is in Hindu the Atman, it leaves your dead body and enters a new one. And so this idea that your core self, your Atman, never changes. It just what it's housed in changes. And depending on how you've lived your life and how you've attended to rituals and how you've treated others, your Atman can proceed up the ladder or down the ladder, but the core of yourself never changes. Karma, that's another term that, again, many Westerners are familiar with. And, kind of the more or less kind of common understanding of karma is not far from its core meaning. It's as you behave, so it will be acted upon you. Karma itself is, as a core Hindu word, just means action, and also at the same time the consequences of an action. As a man or a woman acts, so shall he or she become. So, as you act, so it will be acted upon you. And so what's the ultimate goal? Again, at the risk of kind of painting with a broad brush, at the end of the day, it's not just simply living good lives by good deeds, although that's certainly important. I think you find that in all religions. But ultimately, the ultimate problem you're trying to solve is to deal with this problem of the samsara. Birth, death, rebirth. Birth, death, rebirth. And so, the concept of time in Hinduism and in really all Eastern religions is that you're not getting from point A to point B. You're on this cycle. You're on this circle over and over and over again. And what you want to do is ultimately to be released from that cycle and merged with the Brahman. Your last act of reincarnation is to be released from that cycle of samsara and achieve what's called moksha, liberation from the limits of space, time, matter, and experience that ultimate reality, which is the real reality. And so there's embedded in this is a suspicion of the physical material world. It's a prison. It houses your Atman, but your Atman doesn't belong there. Your Atman belongs here. And so you live a life by which you move up that ladder of reincarnation. And ultimately the goal is, and again, this could be a pattern, a chain of millions of years to get through this, but ultimately that you are trying to achieve moksha. So keep calm and achieve moksha. Do it now. All right. In its earliest forms, Hindu rituals were actually very formalized. I find this really interesting because my sense is that many religions kind of proceed in the opposite direction. It starts as kind of loose individual ideas that ultimately kind of come together and form something more formal. But Hinduism seems to actually have gone in the opposite direction. So Hinduism began as a fairly formalized kind of temple-based religion, and it was controlled by a caste of priests called the Brahmins. You can see the word for the ultimate reality embedded in this names. We'll talk about the caste system. This idea that people belong in society according to Hindu belief, from anywhere from the very lowest part of the food chain to the very top of the food chain, and the very top of the food chain in the Hindu caste system is the Brahmin caste. It's the best of the best, and so the priests were drawn from this society, and they controlled the fire rituals, the chants, the rituals, the sacred actions, and sought to invoke some kind of tangible presence of the Brahman in these rituals. But over time what happens is that this breaks down a bit and becomes much more fragmented, and over time temple ritual, which hasn't gone away, it's still there. There are Hindu temples, there are Brahmins, this kind of stuff still goes on over hundreds of thousands of years. But the vast majority of Hindus today practice in a much more kind of personal way. You have your own dharma, you have your own devotional approach, what they call the bhakti, and you might have a shrine in your house. Your family might be centered around a particular kind of devotional path, which can be incorporated into the temple ritual with the Brahmins or not. And so this is where that kind of fragmented, infinite ways of approaching the divine in Hinduism begins. So here you see just a photograph of a Brahmin temple ritual here. So you see these guys here dressed in the robes. They are the Brahmin priesthood. They are conducting a cleansing fire rituals, and you see these people gathered in the tent, partaking in it. So that Brahmin controlled, organized, run ritual has never gone away. But I would not say that it's the center of Hindu practice in India or anywhere else in the world today. Other texts, the Epics and the Puranas. These are long, heroic narrative poems, which give human form to what was previously abstract. And so here we get many of the principal Hindu gods and goddesses. And so Brahman, the ultimate reality, you don't anthropomorphize, you don't humanize it. And so this idea that, well, where do the gods then come from? Well, all the millions of gods and goddesses are kind of emanations, kind of fragments of Brahman. And they take on human form. And even they themselves can kind of emanate other forms of themselves. It gets really confusing. And there's no way, again, we can cover it all. But it's in the Epics and Puranas that we get kind of a human face on some of these deities. And within this huge collection of Hindu legends, you get the two major epics, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And it's here we see Vishnu, who is, if I had to pick kind of one kind of anthropomorphic, humanized god that kind of serves as the face of Hinduism, I think you could do a lot worse than Vishnu. And so he appears in these epics as not only a supreme being, he's kind of he's an emanation of Brahman, but he's sculptable, he's paintable, he's humanized, he's relatable. And he has active engagement. He's interested in what human beings are doing, and interested in human conceptions of time and destiny, as it were. So here's a depiction of Vishnu, kind of a young, kind of friendly-faced deity. He holds the conch shell in his hand, which is you blow the conch shell, you get that Om kind of vibration in the center of your chest, kind of the ultimate vibrating syllable that was believed to kind of put you in touch with the divine if you use it during meditation. In fact, if some of you have done yoga sessions, the teacher will often end with you sitting in the lotus position, kind of cross-legged, with your arms resting on your knees, and close your eyes, and you finish with an Om. This goes back to kind of ancient Hindu practice, and the conch shell kind of represents kind of that link between the human world and the divine. I talked a little bit about the kind of these notions of time, and for the Australian Aboriginal peoples and for lots of indigenous cultures, that kind of human Western concept of time just simply does not exist. Now, in Eastern religions, as I think I mentioned, you have a more kind of concrete notion of time than I think you find, say, amongst the Australian Aborigines, but it's very different than a Western idea. It is a cycle. It's a circle, and not a line. And their notions of time, and just in terms of numbers, is the numbers themselves are staggering. There is a notion in Hinduism. Again, I don't think this is something that I would say every Hindu believes, but this is embedded in the culture, is that human history is going through cycles of time, and each ultimate world cycle lasts, by our accounting, 4,320,000 years, a staggering expanse of time, and each cycle is divided into 4 1,080,000 year cycles. And so this idea that human culture kind of goes through these 4 stages and then it repeats. And this is a very common, just like we saw in Hesiod, this kind of idea that there's a decline. Things start perfect or near perfect, and then as you kind of go down through the ages, things get worse. What's different here is that in the Eastern notions of time, once you hit rock bottom, ultimately things will start over again. Everything burns out and has to be rebuilt. The first age, dharma, in here, moral order, religious perfection, ritual rightness, is simply natural, and so the kind of connection between human beings and gods is a given. The second age, which in Hindu iconography is sometimes depicted by a cow standing on 3 legs, so you're still fairly stable, but a 3-legged cow is in danger of course, tipping over. The third age, kind of like the Bronze Age for the Greeks, it's a darker age. The people turn away from the gods, turn away from ritual, traditional values slip away. And then the fourth age, depicted by a 1-legged cow, very unstable. The thoroughly corrupt. This is the world at its absolute worst, and sometimes called the Kali Yuga age, associated with the goddess Kali, who is a goddess of disorder, of chaos, of destruction. And so yeah, here's Kali, here with her tongue out and a weapon in almost every hand, and the heads of her enemies on a necklace around her neck, her stomping with her many feet on the body of her latest victim. She is the kind of the ultimate chaos that the cycle, the Kali Yuga cycle, is given over to. And so, according to Hindu belief, we are, sadly to say, currently in a Kali Yuga cycle, and this began a long time ago, in 3120 BCE. So about 5,000 plus years ago, the current Kali Yuga cycle began. And so the good news is that we only have 1,074,860 years to go until we return to that golden age of Dharma. So sit tight and hang on. A text that you might have heard of, again, I think there's one kind of Hindu sacred text that Westerners may have heard of, again, no worries if you haven't, is the so-called Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita is a sub-epic, a sub-part in a larger part of the Mahabharata mystical poem. And the reason the Bhagavad Gita is well known is because it centers around the figure of Krishna. You may have heard of kind of the Hare Krishnas as a kind of a meditation-based, sometimes described as a cult. People differ on that kind of those labels, but it's an offshoot of some aspects of Hinduism. But Krishna is one of the major manifestations of the Supreme Being, and is a very, very popular figure for Hindu worship. So here's a depiction of Krishna. He's one of the things that marks him and his mythology is that he's very close to humanity. He's very interested in helping humanity connect with the divine. He's a transition figure. He's a mediator, and he's also a very gentle figure. You see him playing his flute. The animals come to his side. You see the sacred cow. here by the riverside where the lotus flowers bloom. There, nature is lush and inviting and peaceful around him. And he doesn't hold a weapon. He holds a flute. He's very gentle and very alluring. And so he's a very approachable deity, as it were. So in the Bhagavad Gita, one of the famous stories is that Krishna becomes hooked up with this human charioteer, Arjuna. And Arjuna is a great warrior, and he's interested in the glory of war, and he's quick with his bow, and he's skilled with his chariot. And Krishna says to Arjuna, "You're looking in the wrong place. You're looking for human glory. You're looking for human riches. You're looking for your identity and what other people think of you." And so he encourages Arjuna to reject that lower self for the higher self. Transcend these lowly human desires. Free yourself from all earthly desires. A concept that we'll see in Jainism and Buddhism as well, as the only real path to freedom. Here's an illustration. Here's Arjuna at the chariot with his bow in his hand, but his chariot is being guided by Krishna. And you don't have to look too far for the metaphor. If Krishna is driving your chariot, so to speak, then he's going to take you down the proper path. Note also the conch in his shell here, that symbol of meditation and divine vibration. Also, another thing that many people have heard of or associate with Hinduism and the beliefs of the subcontinent of India is the Ganges, this great river that flows down out of the Himalaya mountains down into the floodplain of northern India. And this river itself is seen as a kind of a manifestation of the divine, Mother Ganga. Here you see I believe this is the city of Varanasi, one of the oldest and most sacred sites in all of India, according to Hinduism. And there's a belief that many Hindus believe that if you die in Varanasi and you have your body cremated right on its banks and your ashes scattered into the river there, you can do an end run around all of those thousands, if not millions of years of samsara and achieve moksha immediately. And so invariably throughout the year you will find these pyres of burning bodies on the banks of the Ganges in the hopes, the families in the hopes of letting their loved ones kind of merge into the divine river and flow off into Brahman as a shortcut to heaven, for lack of a better term here. You'll see this in the episode, the Heaven on Earth episode I'm asking you to watch this week. It's a very striking, disturbing, kind of awesome spectacle. So here's the Ganges River up here. So it kind of flows down out of the Himalayas. Just think about the visual of that for a moment. If the headwaters of the Ganges are up in the highest mountains on the planet, how easy it would be to see as these waters is literally kind of coming down from heaven. I think that's a very live feature of kind of the view of the Ganges. So it's kind of this gift from the gods above. I think the word Himalayas even means something like the rooftop of heaven or the rooftop of the gods or something like that. And so it flows down here in northern India before kind of emptying into the Bay of Bengal here. And so the Ganges River as literally coming down from the sky as a gift to the Indic peoples. A couple more slides here before we finish part one, as a way of kind of getting a handle on some of the ways that Hindus have kind of organized their pantheon and see their deities. There is a kind of trinity, a supreme trinity amongst those millions of Hindu gods, although I would say, to compare this to Christian notions of the Trinity. When you hear the word Trinity, I think in the Western world you tend to think of kind of Christian doctrine, and we'll talk about that down the line. But there is a kind of supreme divine triad amongst the Hindu gods. There's Brahma, which is not to be confused with Brahman, which is that ultimate reality. This is clearly the root of the word is the same, but this is an emanation. This is a more kind of concrete, formalized, anthropomorphic deity. As a creator god, together with Shiva, who we've met, is our destroyer god, and Vishnu is the preserver god. And so each of these gods is in charge of some aspect of creation. Brahma makes it, Vishnu preserves what needs to be preserved, and Shiva destroys what needs to be destroyed. And so there's kind of a tension, but there's also a balance between these three kinds of things. And the other millions of gods kind of descend, maybe in terms of importance, from the top here. Although, if you're looking for consistency in these kinds of things, by and large, once you start digging, you're not going to find it. Here's another one that kind of puts it more in terms of kind of almost a Hesiod-like genealogy. So Brahman is your universal principle, the be-all, end-all, ultimate deity, faceless, unknowable, all-pervasive. The major gods kind of descend as initial emanations from Brahman. So Vishnu, even Kali, the goddess of chaos, Shiva, Lakshmi, Durga, other gods and goddesses we'll look at more specifically next week. They are all kind of different faces, different fragments of Brahman. You can't go straight to Brahman. He's unknowable, untouchable. And so what you do as a Hindu believer, you have to go through some fragment, some aspect of Brahman that's approachable in a more human kind of way. And then we see here it even gets more complicated. You know, Vishnu himself can then emanate. Rama is one of the great heroes in kind of Hindu mythology, as it were. He's a warrior. He's a warrior figure. He is just a fragment of Vishnu. Krishna, who we were just talking about, he too is a emanation of Vishnu. He's another face of Vishnu. So what you might say, Rama represents the more kind of aggressive warrior aspect of Vishnu. Krishna is kind of more his softer, more feminine side, his more approachable, gentle side. But both Rama and Krishna are what we call avatars of Vishnu. And it goes on and on and on from there. So that's just a small little taste of the mind-bending complexity of the Hindu deities. And we'll pick up here next time. We'll try to explain more kind of the wild symbolism that we see in Hinduism, and look at some particular rituals and how this all kind of translates into belief and practice. Thanks for your attention. I will see you next time.